So, on this late February day, I'm out walking in the woods, in the forest. You might say, all by myself. If you take a look, you can't see another human body around me. And yet, despite what some might say, as a sociologist, I'd like to argue that I'm never really alone. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel may have protested in the 1960s, I am a rock, I am an island. But even when they wrote that, they knew it wasn't true, because they'd read John Donne, who centuries earlier had written, no man is an island, no women either. That each of us is part of a continent, a greater being, larger than ourselves as individual human beings. A continent, John Donne writes, that is the lesser for the loss of any individual human being. What John Donne was trying to say, one of the things he was trying to say, was that there is something bigger than ourselves, something that defines us as we define it. That thing is groupness. It is a sense of belonging. It is a sense of identity. It is a sense of interaction. I am not alone, even though I'm out here in the woods on a day filled with cold and sleet and muck, because I carry the debris, the accumulated debris of all my group memberships, my family of origin, my schooling, my friends from when I was a kid, my marriage, the group I belong in now, which is a nuclear family, my profession. I'm a member of the American Sociological Association. I also am a member of the faculty of the University of Maine at Augusta, and a member of this class. In each of these memberships, I gain a piece of meaning. And each of these groups has gained a piece of meaning by me being a part of it. By being a member, I define groups, and groups define me. So that even when I'm out on a really nasty day in the woods in late February, I'm bringing a whole lot of social structure on my shoulders.
If social structure describes a pattern of relationships between elements that somehow explain some outcomes, both for the individuals that are part of the structure and the larger whole, there are actually many kinds of ways of depicting social structure, and each depends on the paradigm and theoretical framework within which that image is created. We'll talk about population structure. We've already talked about cultural structure. We will talk about the structure of a social network. But distinct from all of those is the idea of a social structure based on belonging, affiliation, group membership. So that structure has a visible analogy that was created by Georg Simmel at the turn of the 20th century, about 100 years ago, a little bit more actually. And in a book called Conflict and the Web of Group Affiliation, in English translation, but in the original German, Die Kreuzung sozialer Kreise, the intersection of social circles, Simmel says, we can imagine that a group is like a circle. Why is it interesting to think about a group as a circle? Well, because there's the inside and the outside, those that are part and those that are not a part of that group. So, this might represent a single group. Perhaps it's membership in Sociology 101. You're a part. Some others are not. I'm a part of this class. But that's not the only group that I'm a member of. I also teach a research methods class. Now, that research methods class is a little bit smaller. It doesn't have as many people in it. So you might think, oh, there's not quite as much area to the circle in the analogy. Simmel says, you know, if you think about it, you're a member of many, many different groups. So I am also part of a family, and you'll notice that there's an intersection of family and a research methods class and the Social 101 class. That intersection is me. This idea suggests that there's maybe more than one person who is overlapping in there. Right here, there's just me. I am the intersection of those social circles. I stand at them because I'm the only person who is a part of my biological family, who is also a part of my marital family, right? So I'm married to someone and we have kids together, and who is also part of research methods and Soc 101. Well, I could continue. I could draw another circle, and that might indicate membership in a small choral group. I like to sing, and so on and so forth. Each of these has intersections. There are areas of overlap where members of one group, perhaps my biological family, there's me, but also someone else is in that group as well. The singing group has some members of Social 101 in it, but not Introduction to Research Methods, and on and on and on. I could list probably about 20 groups that I'm a member of. But one of the claims that Simmel made in his work is that to the extent that we feel as though we are individuals, it is because we are unique in our location at the intersection of many, many social circles. Some of them social circles of the past that we may have left. For instance, I used to be part of a graduate program at the University of Arizona. I used to work at Duke University. Those have, as social circles, a lingering effect on me. But also, there is nobody who is in all of these groups. To the extent that there are other individuals in the world, there may be members of Soc 101 who are also part of a biology class. And then somebody who is a member of a biology class and Soc 101 may be a member of a particular church. And maybe they're the only one who is a member of those three groups. So they stand at that unique intersection of social circles, and that gives them their individuality. Why? Well, think of sociology of personality. Well, personhood, the persona, is a word that comes from The ancient Roman referring to the idea of a mask that one would put on stage, and the mask had a unique shape for each character that would signify the character that you took, and therefore the role that you would take. Well, all these masks that we put on, all these personas that we put on, are learned in environments through agents of socialization. Some of them are families, some of them are churches, some of them are educational settings, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. Some of them are peer groups. So in these places, we learn what it is to be a human being, and we often then look across at someone who doesn't share our set of social circles and learned how to be a human being in a different setting, and we say, oh, they're acting inhuman. How could they? Well, it's because they learned a different set of cultural beliefs about what it is to take the identity of human. We also, in some classes like biology, Sociology 101, engage in secondary socialization, where we don't necessarily learn what it is to be a human so much as we learn what it is to gain the skills of biology and of sociology and of social research. Secondary socialization. Nobody has quite had the experiences that I have. Nobody has quite been a member of all the groups that I have. And so no one is quite like me. And that's what makes me different. It's what makes me unique. It's what makes me an individual. This is the Simmelian view of social structure. And you can think of the amazingly complex social structure of our planet, or of just our country, or even just the state of Maine, well over 1 million people, who each have their own unique set of group affiliations and a unique history of group affiliations, leading to an individual sense of identity, but also a sense that one defines oneself according to the groups that one is a member of. So I say, I am a father, I am a child, I am a son, I'm a researcher, I'm a sociologist, and I love to sing. This is who I am. And it's because of the membership in the web of group affiliations that I have. It is the place I stand at the intersection of social circles. So you could draw these yourself. Circles large and small. Circles, some of them intersecting, some of them not. And they would represent your individual identity according to your group membership. They could also represent, if you think of perhaps a friend, the amount of connection you have. How much do these two people have in common? Well, it may just be one class. How close do you think those two people are going to be? If we had two people, on the other hand, who share 3 groups or more groups, how close do you think they're going to be? There's an analogy between physical closeness in space, the space of overlapping social circles, and social closeness, which means intimacy, the amount of time that you spend together, the emotions that you share together, the understandings you have with someone that accumulate to the point where we sometimes get people that they're with us for life because we realize it would cost too much, it would take too much investment for us to lose them as special people in our lives because only they understand, because we are enmeshed with them in this web of group affiliations. That's what social structure does to an individual. It keeps one a member of a community. It also gives one identity. Even the feeling of individuality that one has is, ironically, according to Georg Simmel, a product of the groups that one is and has been a member of. In more recent times, the sociologist Scott Feld, F-E-L-D, reinvented Simmelian sociology, thinking of these not simply as groups, that is, official organizations to which one can belong, like a bowling league, but more generally as foci. Foci is plural of focus. And for Feld, a focus could be a group, it could be an organization, it could also be something like a neighborhood. It could be something like a profession, even if that profession doesn't have an official organizational society. It could still be a focus to the extent it brings people together. It could be a business place that people frequent together, like a grocery store that people attend together, or a bar that people go to together. These are all foci, and for Feld, that is anything is a focus that brings people together, whether it is an officially recognized group or not. Locality brings people together. Being part of the same region, being part of the same county, being part of the same town, the same school district. All of these things are like foci, and they bring us together. There's one additional development that happened fairly recently, and by that I mean within the last generation, and that is one made by Ron Breiger. And Ron Breiger recognized something called duality. The duality of persons and groups is his 1974 article. And in that article, Ron Breiger notes that it is not just people who are defined by groups, but groups that are defined by people. You can think of this physical analogy as occupying space. But what is the space if a small little circle here means a small number of people, and a really big group here, Social 101, refers to a big number of people? Well, then it means that if we think about it implicitly, that space is packed with people. The space on which groups are drawn is people. And there are areas of overlap that do what? From a large scale, from a macro scale, those people tie groups together. So that you can say, well, research methods and Sociology 101, what do they have in connection? Are they connected to one another? Are they affiliated with one another? Why, yes, because there are some people who are members of them. Sociology and biology have an overlap. It's a little bit smaller, but my family in sociology have meanings through these two sociology classes and the intersection there. Singing in sociology, they have a shared connection. And so in a real sense, even if you think singing and sociology have nothing in common, this group chart tells you, oh yes, they do. There is something that will be in common. And what can we expect from that? Well, we can expect here that individuals who are taking the research methods class will have some understanding of sociology because they've had this membership in both. We could understand that if there are enough people who are in this singing group who took sociology, that we might expect in that group some kind of sense of understanding sociology when singing and applying it. There might even be a subgroup, a clique of, oh, the sociologists. They always get together inside this singing group, forming a little subculture of singing in here through that overlap. We've seen it happen before. This is how cliques within larger groups come to pass. So for Breiger, groups bring people together in that Simmelian sense, but people also bring groups together. And that, if you've ever taken a political science class, was the point made a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, by Alexis de Tocqueville, who visited the United States and said, what is it that makes this democracy work in the United States while we have so much trouble in Europe? Remember, at the time, Alexis de Tocqueville was coming over and studying the United States, this young country at the time. Europe was having trouble with revolutions that continued and were roiled with violence. whereas a successful democracy had taken root in the United States, a Republican form of democracy. And Tocqueville says, well, what's going on? He tours around the country and he sees people joining groups. So many groups, so many different kinds of groups. And one of the things that Tocqueville says is that by becoming members of so many groups, we actually, in the United States, or from his point of view, they over there in the United States, because he was a visitor, have interconnection so that groups depend on one another. They all rely on each other, and people are participators, and so they gain the spread of this democratic culture, which is lovely and vibrant, and that keeps the American experiment going. And he said Europe should become more like the United States, which is not something you hear much of these days from Europe. And then, very recently, the most recently of all of these, Robert Putnam comes along in the year 2000 and publishes a book called Bowling Alone. And in that book, Robert Putnam says, yeah, look at this. Look at all these memberships in groups like the Bowling League, memberships in groups like Kiwanis Club, the Masonic Lodge, the Odd Fellows, the League of Women Voters, all these different groups, the NAACP. He looks at all those groups at the beginning of the 20th century and then looks at them again at the end of the 20th century and says, my goodness, there aren't as many people in those organizations at the end of the 20th century as there were at the beginning of the 20th century. And by gum, when people used to bowl in bowling leagues, when they would get together every Friday at 5 p.m. and they would bowl with the same people over and over again against other teams that they would come into contact with over and over and over again. He says now people are just bowling alone, or maybe with one other person, a friend that they bring. And the idea of bowling alone is, well, that people are members of fewer groups, or he puts out this specter, what happens when somebody becomes a member of no groups? Tocqueville says, American democracy depends on people becoming enmeshed in groups and groups becoming enmeshed in each other through common people. An insight that was formalized by Ron Breiger. Robert Putnam says, we may be witnessing the downfall of American democracy because we don't join as many groups. People have criticized his work because he looked at all these groups that started out at the beginning of the 20th century and then looked at the same groups at the end of the 20th century. But one of the things we know about groups is that they tend to die, just like people tend to die. Old groups, some of them linger, but there's a liability of age, which is that people form new groups all the time. And sometimes they aren't recognized by people like Robert Putnam, like meetups or flash mobs, or online groups, not recognized by Putnam in his Bowling Alone book. This is, I hope you've been impressed by the extent to which this imagery is part of an intellectual tradition that reaches from sociology to political science, that this image of social structure has to do with not just the fate of individual people, that nobody is really an island, that we are defined in terms of our groups, but that the group structure defines possibly the fate of entire societies. That's going from micro to meso, which is in between micro and macro, this meso level, this group level, all the way up to macro. The fate of entire societies could be based on how well people join groups, how much people interact in groups, how much they are affiliated, and how much the groups are associated with one another.